Trust is not the absence of fear, but the decision to believe beyond it. It is not the calmness of those who feel safe, but the courage of those who choose to walk through the storm with their eyes fixed on the unseen. For trust is not born in moments of comfort, but in the trembling of the soul when all other lights have gone out. It is in that hour when reason finds no foothold, when logic whispers that all is lost, that true trust begins to speak, quietly, steadily, like a whisper from eternity saying, "Be still." The heart that trusts does not always understand, it does not always feel strong. Yet it refuses to surrender to despair. It looks beyond what the senses can perceive and anchors itself in a certainty that is greater than sight. There are moments in every life when God seems silent, when prayers seem to vanish into the void, when the night stretches endlessly without the promise of dawn. In such times, trust becomes more than a virtue. It becomes the very breath of the Spirit. To trust God completely is to hand Him the pen when you cannot read the script, to rest even when you do not understand the road beneath your feet. It is to say, though I cannot trace His hand, I will trust His heart. For when you reach that sacred point, where trust outweighs fear, you stand on the threshold of miracle. Miracles are not always thunderous events that split the skies. Sometimes they are gentle unfoldings that begin the moment the heart ceases to wrestle and starts to rest. The greatest miracles are often the quiet ones. The peace that returns after chaos, the strength that rises after collapse, the light that dawns softly after long despair. Such wonders are not born of striving but of surrender. They begin when the soul learns to whisper, "Even this, Lord, I trust you with." It is in the act of unclenching the fists, in loosening our grasp upon what we think must be, that divine power finds room to work. To trust completely is to love completely, for one cannot fully trust what one does not deeply love. Love believes that even the fire has purpose, that even the delay hides mercy. It sees the hand of God not merely in blessings, but in burdens, not merely in triumphs, but in trials. Trusting God does not mean expecting that everything will go as we wish, but that everything will go as He wills, and that His will is good. It is the deep assurance that no pain is wasted, no tear unseen, no waiting empty. Trust transforms confusion into pilgrimage and suffering into sacred refinement. The journey of trust often begins with the breaking of self-sufficiency. We are taught to plan, to calculate, to control, yet the divine life begins where our control ends. When you trust God completely, you exchange your fragile wisdom for His infinite understanding. You stop demanding answers and start receiving peace. You no longer ask why the storm came. Instead, you learn who is in the boat with you. The miracle is not always that the sea is stilled, but that your heart is. Many live at the edges of faith, believing in God but not trusting Him. They hold His promises with one hand and their fears with the other. But miracles are not born in divided hearts. They come when faith leaps, when one dares to step into the unseen and say, "If I perish, but I will trust Him." It is that leap that heaven honors. It is that surrender that turns impossibility into testimony. Trusting God does not exempt you from difficulty, but it changes how difficulty is met. The same storm that drowns the fearful becomes the proving ground of the faithful. Every trial becomes a canvas upon which God paints His mercy. Every delay a doorway to deeper revelation. The soul that trusts does not need to see the path, for it knows the guide. And this knowing, this resting in divine goodness, is itself a miracle. The miracle of peace amid uncertainty, of hope amid silence, of faith amid the dark. Trust begins as a seed planted in trembling, watered with tears, and grown under the weight of waiting. Yet in time, it bears fruit, a joy that does not depend on circumstances, a strength that does not waver in storms. And when the soul learns this trust, heaven moves. Not because God was reluctant before, but because trust clears the clutter of doubt and makes room for His power to flow unhindered. The gates of the miraculous swing open, not through striving but through resting, not through fear but through faith. So when the night deepens and the answers tarry, do not let your heart yield to fear. Remember that trust is not pretending the valley isn't dark. It is walking through it knowing the shepherd walks beside you. When you trust God completely, something shifts in the unseen. The heavens align, strength returns, and peace descends like dew upon weary hearts. And though you may not yet see the miracle with your eyes, it has already begun in the quiet courage of your trust. The posture of surrender opens the gates of divine intervention. There is a kind of strength that the world does not understand. The strength that bows low. In the kingdom of man, victory is measured by control, by the ability to command, to possess, to conquer. But in the kingdom of heaven, victory begins with release. The soul that surrenders is not one that has been defeated, but one that has discovered a higher power at work beyond its own striving. To surrender is to say, I do not need to carry what was never mine to bear. It is to let the Creator resume his rightful place as the author of your story, the keeper of your days, and the defender of your peace. True surrender is not laziness nor resignation, it is trust in motion. It is the soul unclenching its grasp on outcomes, releasing every anxious plan, every secret fear, every timeline crafted by pride or panic. Surrender says, if I must lose what I thought was good to gain what God knows is best, so be it. It is the stillness that comes not from indifference, but from confidence in divine love. The surrendered heart ceases to fight against what it cannot change and begins instead to rest in the one who never changes. There are moments when surrender feels like death, when dreams collapse, when doors close, when answers are withheld. The instinct of the flesh is to fight, to wrestle for control, to demand an explanation, to fix what cannot be fixed. But in that very moment, when strength fails and self-will shatters, something sacred begins to rise. The surrender that feels like the end is often the beginning of a miracle. For God cannot fill what is already full, cannot steer a vessel that insists on its own course. Only when the hands release the oars does the current of divine grace begin to move the soul toward its destined shore. Many pray for miracles, yet few are willing to surrender the conditions through which miracles come. We say, Lord, move this mountain. But secretly we plan how it should move and where it should go. Surrender, however, does not dictate. It yields. It does not instruct heaven but listens for its whisper. When you surrender, you are no longer commanding God's power, you are inviting His will. And His will, though mysterious, is always merciful. It weaves even pain into purpose and turns delays into divine choreography. The world will tell you to hold tighter, to fight harder, to never let go. Yet there comes a moment in every life when holding on becomes the very thing that keeps us bound. What you cling to in fear becomes a chain, what you release in faith becomes a key. Surrender is that key. It unlocks the doors we could never force open. It quiets the storms we could never silence. For it is in surrender that the soul aligns with heaven, and once aligned, the impossible begins to bow. Look through the great stories of faith, and you will find this pattern written like a divine signature. Surrender before miracle. Abraham laying down his son before receiving the promise fulfilled. Moses lifting empty hands before the sea parted. Mary saying, "Be it unto me," before heaven touched earth. Each miracle begins with a relinquishing, a choice to trust rather than to control. This is not weakness, it is worship. It is the sacred posture that bends low only to rise higher. Surrender is not the escape from responsibility, but the embrace of divine partnership. You still move, still act, still labor, but without the poison of anxiety. You become an instrument rather than an engineer, a vessel rather than a builder. The peace that comes from this posture cannot be manufactured. It is the quiet assurance that your life is being held by hands far steadier than your own. In surrender, fear loses its power, because it can no longer threaten what has already been given away. Often, the miracle you seek is not withheld. It is simply waiting for you to release your grip. For as long as your heart clings to its own understanding, it blocks the flow of divine wisdom. As long as you fight to control outcomes, the hand of heaven cannot freely move. But when you yield, truly yield, not as a performance, but as a confession of trust, the atmosphere shifts. The winds of the Spirit begin to move unseen. and what seemed impossible begins to unfold with effortless grace. To surrender is to believe that the God who made you knows what will make you whole. It is to rest in the mystery that even unanswered prayers are answered differently. It is to stand before the unknown with open hands and say, "I am yours, even here." And that is where heaven rushes in. Miracles do not bloom in the soil of resistance, but in the garden of surrender. The moment you stop striving to command life and start allowing God to conduct it, the melody of peace begins to play, and what was once chaos finds harmony. In the end, the posture of surrender is the highest act of faith. It is the declaration that God is good, even when life is not, that His wisdom surpasses your understanding, that His plan is still perfect even when yours has fallen apart. And in that surrender, quiet, unseen, yet profoundly powerful, the gates of divine intervention swing open, and grace begins to flow like a river unbound. Faith grows strongest in the soil of uncertainty. It is a strange paradox that what feels like confusion to man often becomes the very ground where heaven builds its mightiest works. We long for clarity, for assurance, for the comfort of knowing how things will unfold. Yet faith does not bloom in the sunlight of certainty. It is a flower that only opens its petals in the night. God does not strengthen faith by answering every question, but by asking us to walk when the path is dim and the horizon hidden. For in that walking, in that trembling obedience amid the unknown, faith learns to see with different eyes. Uncertainty strips us of illusions. It takes away the false securities we have built around ourselves. The plans, the predictions, the sense of control. And though we call it loss, it is mercy in disguise. For only when those fragile supports fall away can we learn what it means to trust something deeper, something eternal. Faith is not a possession, it is a pilgrimage. It grows not in comfort, but in crisis, not when we see the way clearly, but when we step into the fog believing there is a way. Each step into the unknown becomes a declaration. Though I cannot see it, I believe it exists. And in that believing, heaven meets us. Consider the seed buried in the soil. It is pressed into darkness, stripped of light, seemingly forgotten beneath the earth. Yet it is there, unseen, that life begins. The roots reach down before the stem reaches up, and the breaking precedes the blooming. So it is with faith. The moments that feel like burial are often the moments of becoming. When you are surrounded by uncertainty, when answers do not come and clarity remains distant, you are not being abandoned. You are being grown. God is teaching your heart to live not by sight but by trust, not by evidence but by assurance in His character. The soil of uncertainty is not meant to punish but to purify. It sifts our motives, revealing whether we love God for His gifts or for Himself. When everything is clear and easy, our devotion can quietly depend on outcomes. But when the path grows dark, when the promise delays, when prayers seem unanswered, our love is tested and refined. Faith that survives the night becomes stronger than sight itself. It no longer depends on what it feels, but on what it knows. That God is good even here, even now. In seasons of uncertainty, we are tempted to grasp for control. We plan, we predict, we panic. Yet faith whispers a different invitation. To pause, to breathe, to rest in what cannot be seen. This does not mean inaction, but a deeper kind of action. The courage to trust when logic trembles. Faith does not ask you to deny reality. It asks you to anchor your soul in a greater reality, one unseen but more enduring than anything the senses perceive. The clouds may hide the stars, but the stars remain. So it is with God's promises in times of uncertainty. They are hidden, not gone. There is a strange grace that lives in not knowing. For it is in the space between question and answer that we learn to listen. When everything is certain, prayer becomes a habit, but when life unravels, prayer becomes a lifeline. When uncertainty deepens, dependence grows. The heart learns to cling not to outcomes, but to presence, not to answers, but to the answerer. That is the holy exchange of faith. It trades the comfort of clarity for the company of God. The saints of old walked through this same fog. Noah built an ark without rain. Abraham journeyed without a map. Moses walked into the sea before it parted. Each one learned that faith is not the guarantee of understanding, but the courage to keep moving while understanding is withheld. They discovered that uncertainty is not the enemy of faith, but its cradle. For only in mystery can faith be born, and only in waiting can it mature. Often, we pray for stronger faith while pleading for certainty, but heaven rarely grants both. Certainty requires sight, faith requires trust. You cannot have both at once. So God, in His wisdom, allows uncertainty, not to harm, but to heal, not to confuse, but to clarify what matters most. When you do not know what will happen next, you learn who holds what happens next. And that knowledge, quiet and steadfast, becomes the rock beneath your trembling feet. Faith does not promise a life without uncertainty. It promises peace within it. It teaches the soul to be still even when the storm rages, to rest even when directions are unclear. This peace does not come from knowing the future, but from knowing the one who holds it. The soil of uncertainty becomes sacred ground when watered with trust. Every unanswered question, every delayed dream, every unexpected turn becomes an altar upon which faith is refined. And though uncertainty may feel endless, it is never purposeless. For in those dark seasons where your eyes cannot see, your roots grow deeper. In silence, your soul learns to hear. In waiting, your heart learns to hope. Faith that is born in certainty is fragile, but faith forged in uncertainty is unbreakable. And when at last the dawn breaks and the path is revealed, you will find that the miracle was not merely in what changed around you, but in what was transformed within you. When you let go, heaven takes hold. There is a divine exchange hidden in that moment, when the soul releases its tight grip upon what it cannot control. We spend so much of life clinging to plans, to people, to our own understanding of how things should unfold. Yet every time we tighten our hold on the temporary, we forfeit the eternal hand reaching toward us. Letting go is not defeat. It is the first step into divine partnership. It is the soul's quiet admission that it was never meant to carry the weight of its own destiny. For only when we release what we think is ours do we discover what was always meant for us. Letting go is one of the hardest lessons the human heart must learn. We are taught from youth to take charge, to hold fast, to make things happen. But the kingdom of heaven speaks a different language. It calls us not to force, but to yield, not to conquer, but to trust. When you let go, it is not your weakness that is exposed. It is your faith. You are confessing with your open hands that you believe in a God strong enough to hold what you cannot. And in that sacred surrender, the unseen begins to move. Heaven, which waits for the signal of a trusting heart, begins to align its wonders around your release. Letting go does not mean you stop caring or stop trying. It means you stop carrying. You still act, still hope, still love, but without the chain of control. You stop demanding that every outcome bend to your will, and you start believing that every outcome will bend to your good. It is a quiet transfer of ownership, from the trembling grasp of man to the steady hands of God. The very act of loosening your hold becomes a declaration of trust. I am no longer my own defender, my own provider, my own savior. I am held by one greater. There is a mystery here that few understand until they have walked through the fire of loss or disappointment. Sometimes God will gently remove what we cling to most, not to harm us, but to heal us. For as long as our fists remain closed, they cannot receive new gifts. As long as our hearts remain tethered to the old, they cannot embrace the new. Every letting go becomes a passage, a holy corridor through which grace can enter. The pain of release is the price of transformation. What feels like emptiness is often the space where miracles take root. Heaven cannot take hold of a life that insists on steering itself. When you are determined to manage every detail, to force every door open, to solve what was meant to be surrendered, you stand in the way of the very help you need. But the moment you release control, when you stop trying to fix the unfixable and prove the unprovable, heaven begins its work. The invisible hands of grace, long waiting for your permission, start weaving solutions beyond your imagination. The miracle you sought by striving is delivered instead by surrender. Letting go is not an event but a posture. a way of living. It is the daily decision to release the illusion of control and trust the wisdom of divine providence. Some days you may release it only to reach for it again, and yet even that is grace. For God is patient with our trembling fingers, teaching us gently that His grip is firmer, His timing kinder, His plan greater. The more we let go, the freer we become, not because circumstances change immediately, but because our hearts do. The chains of fear and striving fall away, and we begin to breathe in the rhythm of peace. Consider how the bird flies. It does not cling to the air, it trusts it. The moment it lifts its wings, surrender begins and flight becomes possible. So it is with the soul. You were not created to cling to the ground, to live anchored by fear or control. You were meant to soar, to rise on the invisible strength of faith. But flight requires release. To rise, you must first let go of what holds you down. When you release, heaven does not let you fall. It lifts you. Many of life's burdens remain not because God refuses to take them, but because we refuse to release them. We ask Him to heal while holding on to our wounds, to guide while clutching our own maps. Yet God does not pry open closed hands, He waits until they open freely. And when they do, when you finally breathe the prayer, Lord, I give it to you, the weight begins to lift. The situation may not change at once, but your heart does. And that is the beginning of every true miracle. Letting go also means releasing the past. The guilt that haunts, the shame that whispers, the regrets that bind. You cannot reach for tomorrow while chained to yesterday. The moment you surrender the past to God's mercy, you make room for His redemption. What you thought was wasted time becomes woven into grace. Heaven takes hold of broken stories and rewrites them with beauty. Nothing surrendered is ever lost. Everything yielded becomes sanctified. To let go is to trust that you are held, even in the falling. It is to believe that underneath are everlasting arms, strong enough to bear you, wise enough to guide you, and loving enough to restore you. The miracle does not begin when you fight harder. It begins when you surrender deeper. And though the letting go may bring tears, those tears water the very ground where faith grows. For when you let go, heaven takes hold, and in those unseen hands, all that was heavy becomes light. All that was broken begins to heal, and all that was impossible begins to unfold in divine order. God's timing is the hidden language of miracles. It speaks in rhythms we seldom understand, in pauses that seem endless, in delays that test the soul's endurance. Yet every heartbeat of heaven carries precision beyond comprehension. We are creatures of immediacy, forever straining against the slow unfolding of divine purpose. We want answers now, doors open now, blessings arrive now. But God moves in eternity, not urgency. His timing is not slow, it is deliberate. Like the master composer who allows silence before the crescendo, He uses waiting not as punishment, but as preparation. What we mistake for delay is often divine design, orchestrating circumstances in ways we cannot yet perceive. To trust God's timing is to rest in a mystery that the mind cannot untangle. It is to believe that the pauses are as purposeful as the promises. For every seed must endure its hidden season in the soil before the bloom breaks forth. Every dawn must wait through the longest night before the sun returns. So too does every prayer, every dream, every act of faith move through its appointed time. The soul that understands this ceases to wrestle with the clock and begins to worship through the waiting. It knows that what seems late in human reckoning is always right on time in heaven's calendar. Waiting is not idleness, it is the workshop of God. It is in those quiet, uncertain stretches where nothing seems to move that heaven does its deepest work within us. While we are fixated on outcomes, God is shaping our hearts. He refines patience, deepens trust, strengthens endurance, and teaches us to value presence over progress. Miracles, when they come, are not just about the change in circumstances. They are about the transformation of the one who waited. For a miracle without maturity is a gift without grounding. God's timing ensures that when the blessing arrives, we are ready to carry it. We often pray for miracles, but resist the waiting that gives them meaning. We plead for divine intervention while demanding our own schedule. Yet God's timing is never arbitrary. It is always relational. He waits not because he must, but because he loves. Every delay is a form of mercy. Every postponement a shield against unready hands. Sometimes what we ask for too soon would destroy us. Sometimes what we think is absence is actually alignment. Heaven is never still. It is weaving, arranging, preparing the stage for a revelation that will make sense only in hindsight. Think of Joseph, languishing in prison long after his innocence was known. Think of David, anointed king yet still tending sheep. Think of Sarah, whose womb remained silent until laughter filled her tent. Each waited under the weight of divine timing. And when the moment finally came, it was clear that the wait had never been wasted. What God delayed, he perfected. What he withheld, he preserved for the appointed hour. The tapestry of his timing is woven with threads of both waiting and wonder, both silence and song. Impatience blinds us to the artistry of the eternal. When we rush, we tear the threads. When we demand, we distort the pattern. But when we surrender to the rhythm of divine timing, peace begins to replace anxiety. We learn that not every closed door is rejection. Some are protection. Not every delay is denial. Some are preparation. The heart that trusts God's timing ceases to live in panic and begins to live in rhythm with heaven. Each day becomes a note in the grand symphony of grace, where even the rests have music in them. Miracles, you see, are not sudden. They are seen suddenly. The moment we call miraculous is only the unveiling of what God has long been arranging behind the curtain of time. What appears overnight has been forming in unseen places for years. The child's cry at Bethlehem was the answer to promises spoken across centuries. The resurrection at dawn was the fulfillment of love written before the foundation of the world. So it is with every miracle in your life. It will come not a moment early, nor a moment late. It will arrive precisely when the heart is ready and the stage prepared. There is a deep peace in living by this truth. You no longer need to measure your life by how quickly prayers are answered or how swiftly doors open. You begin instead to see time as sacred, every moment an instrument of divine intention. The delays become holy teachers, the waiting becomes worship. You start to thank God not only for what has arrived, but for what is still on the way. The silence no longer feels empty, because you know it hums with the sound of preparation. To trust God's timing is to relinquish the tyranny of the clock. It is to believe that the God who set the stars in motion has not lost track of your story. You are not behind, you are becoming. The pause you endure is not punishment, it is perfection taking shape. Every tick of time carries his fingerprint, every turn of season bears his wisdom. What you think is slow is merely sacred, what feels delayed is actually divine orchestration unfolding in love. And when the appointed hour comes, when heaven finally opens the curtain, you will look back and see that the waiting was the miracle all along. For it was in the waiting that your faith deepened, your trust matured, your soul learned to sing without seeing. God's timing is not simply a schedule, it is his language. And when you learn to listen to it, you will find that every pause, every delay, every silence was whispering the same promise: be still. I am working. In my time, it will be beautiful. The heart that trusts becomes the vessel through which wonders flow. For miracles do not merely happen to the trusting heart, they happen through it. Trust is not only the posture of receiving, it is the channel of divine power moving from heaven to earth. When a soul learns to rest in the goodness of God without striving, without fear, without the need to control or understand, something in the unseen realm shifts. Heaven looks for such hearts, quiet, steady, surrendered, and through them, the invisible becomes visible. The trusting heart becomes the living conduit of grace, carrying light into the dark corners of the world. Trust transforms the human spirit into a sanctuary where the divine can dwell unhindered. The anxious heart resists grace. It is too full of noise, too filled with calculation and fear. But the trusting heart is still, spacious, uncluttered. It gives God room to move. When you trust, you cease to demand explanations and begin to live in expectation. You stop asking, how will this happen? And start saying, let it be done. That shift, subtle yet sacred, turns your life into holy ground. The presence of God, which once seemed distant, now finds a home in the stillness of your faith. Miracles are not random interruptions of natural order. They are the natural expression of supernatural order. They flow wherever trust clears the path. A heart that trusts becomes aligned with heaven's rhythm. Obedient, peaceful, open. And in that alignment, divine power finds freedom to manifest. This is why faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. It is not the size of the faith that matters, but the purity of its trust. The miracle does not originate from human will, but from divine power flowing through human surrender. To trust is to create space for God to act. Worry closes the door, trust opens it. Doubt dims the light, trust lets it shine. Each act of trust, each moment you choose to rest instead of fear, to praise instead of panic, becomes a silent invitation for heaven to intervene. God does not require perfection to work through you. He requires permission. And the heart that trusts gives that permission continually, saying without words, "Here I am, Lord."